Main Event Maniacs, presented by the Juice Box.
The main event can make or break a show. It doesn't matter how good the undercard is, if the main event's a stinker, the entire event can be tainted.
Here on Main Event Maniacs, we will revisit some of the most memorable main events in sports entertainment history, both good and bad across various promotions and eras of professional wrestling. I'm Jay and happy to be joined by the hexagon to my square, good friend and co-host Brian. And Brian, I've been waiting to talk about that and drop that joke for a while because if you were to ask me in a blind taste test, what do you know about TNA, Jay, before we've talked about the last couple episodes and things that we're doing here, I would have said like, oh yeah, the odd-sided ring. That was the thing I remember, though it wasn't. I thought that was always, but apparently it was only part of the time.
It was a very, unfortunately, short period of time. Now, you'll get different reactions from people on that. I loved the six-sided ring.
It's
I
different.
thought it was cool. It brought attention to them. And they had it for several years. I think they started using it in 2004, maybe 5.
Yeah.
Actually, I think they started using it just before they went to Fox Sports Net. And it was to bring attention to the promotion as something different that you see, so that if you were to somehow change a channel and hit Fox Sports Net and saw that, you'd be like, wow, what is this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a foreign concept. In Mexico, they use a six-sided ring, and some other promotions use a six-sided ring, so they brought that in to kind of give it a different flavor. I liked it. Some of the wrestlers liked it. Some of them didn't like it. I mean, 6 sides, it was tighter ropes, so they didn't have as much give as a 4-sided ring did. So that made things a little more, difficult at times. But it offered up so many different options, especially for X Division wrestlers. They had different angles to bounce people off of, all sorts of stuff, and I thought it was cool.
Yeah, it definitely was something unique, and that's a great intro into what we're talking about because it's one of the matches that really minted what you could do with a 6-sided ring. And it's TNA Unbreakable 2005, right? And a main event that doesn't feature the heavyweight championship. What?
Well, this is the dark period of TNA. They had no television yet. They were just about to debut on Spike TV about a little less than a month later from this show. But they went with, I guess they went with the X Division to kind of sell this show over the heavyweight champion at the time, which was Raven versus Rhino. So an ECW type matchup. They decided that it would be better. And to be honest, they really kind of made Raven a under character anyway during this period. He wasn't really featured as the stars. X Division was being brought in to be the star here.
Yeah, and we talked about that at the end of our last episode where we talked about the Jarrett Raven dynamic and kind of what came of them afterward and such. But on this one, it's an X Division championship with Christopher Daniels, the champion, Samoa Joe, and AJ Styles. Now, when you say X Division, I immediately think cruiserweight, but you already said the last time we talked about TNA, that wasn't really the true. You didn't have to be a certain weight, obviously not, because you got Samoa Joe in there, who's a much bigger guy than Daniels and Styles. What was the X Division? What made it different than the regular group? Can you explain that at all?
Can anyone explain that at all? I don't even think Jeff Jarrett can explain that at all. Honestly, in watching years of this, for the majority of the time, X Division represented high pace, fast action, nonstop action, right? That was what TNA was built to be, as nonstop action. Right. It didn't matter who the wrestlers were, what your weight was, all that. Abyss could wrestle an X Division match in TNA because as long as you were moving and you move after move after move and high intensity, high flying, all that stuff. That's all they really did. So Samoa Joe was the first test, I think, to say of that. X Division doesn't matter about weight limits or it's about action. Mm-hmm. And when he came in, he's a much bigger guy than most of the X Division wrestlers were at the time, and he hung with them. And that was what made the X Division, I think, more fun. But nobody can really tell you what the X Division was. It wasn't about weight limits. It was about no limits, right? That was like the catchphrase they used for it. Well, okay. It was cruiserweight wrestling by anyone. Just go in there and have a kick-ass, fast-paced, tons of action match, and that was it. That's how I'd explain it anyway.
I mean, I think that's a pretty good way of summing it up because I went down the rabbit hole after watching this because as we talked about it on our last show, didn't watch a lot of TNA. I didn't see this when it happened. It was one of those that I had heard about through the Vine, and watched years later, and got why everybody was gaga over it. But I kind of went down the rabbit hole of X Division, and I was like, okay, let me see what all this has, and a lot of them go down like this. I mean, they go down like you say, like some of the best cruiserweight matches of the WCW Monday Night Nitro era, which I argue is some of the best creative stuff they did. They buried it on the shows, but sometimes it was the best stuff to watch outside of all the NWO and how everything was going on that. And it was fun. It's fun stuff. And again, it's all in the fact that you've got to have performers who can pull it off. Not only pull off the moves, but also can you get a story in the middle of total nonstop action, and all that kind of stuff. And they really centered it around three guys here who knew how to draw heat on each other and could get crowds going in Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, and AJ Styles. Now I came to know Samoa Joe and AJ when they hit WWE years later, but heard about their reputations and things like that. I didn't know who Christopher Daniels was. I'd never seen any of his stuff before until I watched this match and went down another little side rabbit hole of his and thought, holy cow, man, what a guy that just never got to the the biggest limelight maybe, but boy, what a worker.
I'll define the X Division in early years like this. The first part of the X Division, what really cemented it was AJ Styles, Jerry Lynn, and Loki. Those three going back and forth for that first year of TNA really made the X Division what it was. Next, you got Sonny Siaki, still AJ Styles, right? But they were kind of fading him out into the heavyweight division at the time. And you got wrestlers like Elix Skipper and things like that where they were going on. It really got a big renaissance when Samoa Joe came and Christopher Daniels. And, Christopher Daniels was working with Elix Skipper as a tag team called Triple X in 2003. They were great. And then he branched out into the X Division. And these three really, they made X Division even better than it was before. Now, AJ had been dallying in and out of the X Division. He was the NWA champion in 2003, and he kind of fought in that heavyweight division. When the Fox Sports thing came around, they moved him back into the X Division to kind of showcase that to the hopefully wider audience, right? And he stayed there for a while. Then he got back into the heavyweight division, and then now he's coming back out of the heavyweight division as we're coming into this feud here. So he had been as of June, as a Slammiversary, when he dropped the title in the King of the Mountain match to Raven, as we mentioned last show. He was in the heavyweight division. Then he moved in back to the X Division, and that's where we are at this point. So yeah, that's defining the X Division, and those three were the top three at the time.
Yeah, that's the thing, is this whole match is, and really in a lot of ways this pay-per-view is built around this idea of let's take the hottest three guys in this division and put them against each other, in a three-way match. And just on the outset, triple threat matches, kind of where are you on those? What do you think about them?
Well, it really depends on who's in them, right? I mean, I like triple threat matches. I like fatal four-way matches. I think they can be very entertaining. The concept of a triple threat match is really fun because at any time you could have a match won, but only to have someone else break it up because you have another guy to worry about. I like that interaction in those matches, so I'm a big fan of triple threat matches. I think they're fun, they're entertaining, and again, depending on who's in them, they can be amazing. And I think some of the greatest TNA matches that they've had are triple threat matches. You go back to AJ Styles, Jerry Lynn, and Loki, like I said before, they had two just absolutely lights out triple threat matches in the early years of TNA.
Yeah, my only draw on those is that sometimes it feels like there's one guy that just gets knocked to the side and he's just out for a long time. So you're just having and then he just comes back at the end to cause mayhem. And I'm like, no, it's hard to do, I know, but having an even balance of everybody sort of fighting each other, and there's going to be alliances and all that stuff because it's like a game of Risk. You're constantly trading each other. I'm going to attack my enemy here, and now you're my enemy. But it's hard to do. But that's my only drawback to these. But when they're done right, they are a lot of fun, and it's a way to get a lot of good performers in the same ring together. So we've talked about what we're talking about here. Brian, give us a little bit of the build-up on this one because there's not a ton. Like we said, they've really put this together as a way to showcase the division.
Yeah, and it really begins with AJ Styles, right? AJ Styles had been the NWA world's heavyweight champion, and then lost it in that King of the Mountain match, and then was kind of moved right back into that X division. Samoa Joe had come around and he just tore the X division up. He was like a breath of fresh air for that division. And Christopher Daniels at this point was the longest reigning X division champion, 6-month run with the title. And so he had been really dominating that division there. They held this event called the Super X Cup Tournament or something like that. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was something like Super X Cup Tournament to determine who was going to face Christopher Daniels at this pay-per-view. And Samoa Joe ended up winning it with the help of Christopher Daniels, who attacked AJ Styles. And then AJ Styles would come out and attack Christopher Daniels the next night or whatever it was on Impact, next episode Impact. And then it kind of really built into that, and they decided to make it a 3-way match because Christopher Daniels wanted AJ Styles suspended, and I'm trying to remember, they have so many directors of authority. It was like Dusty Rhodes, I think, was the director.
Larry Zbyszko was involved in that.
Zbyszko,
I know that. Yeah. So.
And I think they fired Dusty Rhodes, or I don't know. It was some weird shit. But either way, they, instead of suspending AJ Styles, they added him to the match to make it a 3-way match. And that's kind of really all the buildup is. There's not a ton here other than they had the tournament. Joe wins. They fight each other. It becomes a 3-way match.
Yeah, and the scene for this is the TNA Impact Zone, which is 3 sound stages stuck together at Universal Studios in Orlando, which is smart, way to do it. But I looked at this and I had to check like multiple sources because I was like, this can't be right. The crowd was like 800 people. Like it's between 770, 795, depending on the source. I think 775 was the one I kept seeing the most or whatever. And it was a really small crowd, but the way it shot and stuff, I didn't ever pay attention to that. I knew it was a smaller event. It wasn't as big as the Fairgrounds thing that we talked about last time. Certainly wasn't as big as some of the other main events we talked about. But a small crowd, and there's no information on any of the buy rates and stuff for the pay-per-views and things like that at the time, because they would do a deal like you pay like $40 and then you could watch it for so long and something like that. And so I think you were involved in some of those you talked about before. But I was sort of blown away by how not large the crowd was, but how large it seemed in terms of the way it was presented and things like that.
That's the beauty of a soundstage, is that it's so close together that you can really get the crowd's reaction bouncing off all those walls, and it makes it sound a lot bigger than it was. Like the downfall of being at Universal Studios is that they were only allowed to bring in so many people from non-park goers, right? They had to have seats available for park goers to come in and just watch. It was free, so they weren't making any money on the crowd other than maybe merch sales outside of that. But they sometimes would only draw 300-400 people at a show, because it's just hard to get people at Universal Studios to come in and just watch a wrestling event unless you knew what you were doing, right? So these pay-per-views, they would typically get between 500 and 1,000. I think the max that place held was just under 1,000 people, so they never had massive crowds for these. But again, they weren't making any money off them, so they just needed bodies and seats to make noise. Yeah, and that's what it was. And it was set up in a good enough way that they were able to make it seem larger than it was. And they shot it well enough where you didn't see that it was so small, right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, you didn't notice that it was, like I say, that compacted place, right? But I do give them credit for making the production bigger than what it looks like. So you can do that, in a wrestling venue and things like that. I remember some of those things that WCW did in the early days of WCW. It was a very small place in like Atlanta. It was part of the Omni, and it was basically like a backstage of it that they were shooting that on. And it looked bigger as a kid to me because everybody was right on top of it. It was really loud. But the more they would go to bigger places, you could tell there wasn't the big crowd there. The sound would disperse out and stuff. So smart way of doing it for TNA here. And they bring in Mike Tenay and Don West. You've got professional commentators. They're going to do their job. You've got David Pincer doing the ring announcing, except Jeremy Borash is going to do the main event. And so he's a big part of that. You've got Shane Douglas doing interviews. They're doing all this. And it's a stacked card too, man. Like you got 9 matches on this thing. And they go through a lot of people on this to get it done. I want to run down the match card here real quick, because I want to know from your perspective, some of these names that you'll know. You had 6-man tag, you had the 3 Live crew, BJ James, Conan, and Ron, R-Truth Killings, and they took on the Diamonds in the Rough, David Young, Alex Skipper, and Simon Diamond. I don't know any of those last 3 people. Who are they?
So David Young was an X Division guy from London, I believe. And Elix Skipper is the guy who walked the steel cage. Do you know that one? Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
He was Christopher Daniels' partner with Loki in Triple X.
Okay.
And he's the one who walked the cage and did the Hurricane Rana from the top of the cage onto America's Most Wanted. Phenomenal worker. Phenomenal worker. So Simon Diamond was an ECW wrestler. Good worker. Didn't really do a whole lot here. He had some tag team success for a little while, but yeah, this was kind of just thrown together as a 3-piece to face 3 Live Crew, who would later go on to be called VKM. What does that stand for, you think?
I'm going to let it go. So, but no, it's fun enough. It's fine. You got Austin Aries taking on Roderick Strong. That was a good singles match. A couple of names you know. Another tag team, Kip James, Monty Brown taking on Apollo and Lance Hoyt. And who have been around for some things. So there's some good stuff. And then Chris Sabin and Petey Williams in the singles match. So they've got some good stuff going on here. Some good momentum.
Yeah, Chris Sabin and Petey Williams. Oh, Petey Williams is one of those guys I really wish would have gotten a better and bigger push, especially outside of TNA when he went. I think he was very briefly part of WWE, but his work later on in TNA with Scott Steiner as Little Papa Pump, fantastic stuff. He would dress like Scott Steiner with the chains and everything, and just so good. Great worker. Canadian Destroyer was his big move that you see it all the time now, but back then you never saw something like that. It was super cool. Chris Sabin, we all know who he is. Motor City Machine Guns. Fantastic worker. He had his own section in the Impact Zone, or not the Impact Zone, in the Asylum called the Sabin section, which is where I sat when I went and saw them. I love it. So he was a very over with the TNA fans.
Very cool. You got 3 more before you get to the double main event, if you want to call it that. You got the no DQ match, Abyss with James Mitchell and Sabu. They put on a tear down match. I mean, that was pretty wild. You got Bobby Roode taking out Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy in one of his many places he has stopped in his career. Pretty good match. And then you got a NWA World Tag Team 4-way elimination match. So teams get knocked off as they go. You got the Naturals, Andy Douglas and Chase Stevens. They won the whole thing. They defeated Alex Shelley and Johnny Candido and America's Most Wanted, Chris Harris, James Storm, and Team Canada, A1 and Eric Young. So Team Canada actually did the work up until the end, and then the Naturals came in and finished them off. But I was not as familiar with Team Canada as I was some of these other folks.
Well, A1 was around for a very short period of time. He was like the jacked up Canada member. Eric Young, Team Canada was, so how that came about, TNA would do shows, I think every 4th show of the month would be a World Cup event, and they'd have wrestlers from Japan versus wrestlers from Canada versus wrestlers from Mexico versus wrestlers from the United States, right? And they would have these big tournaments every 4 weeks or so, and that's how Team Canada got put together, and a bunch of them stuck around, Eric Young being the main one who's still around to this day. A1 not around anymore, just kind of a jacked up guy, didn't really get as over with crowds as some of the other guys did. Scott D'Amore, that we mentioned last episode, he was the manager of Team Canada. Johnny Candido, I don't remember him at all.
I know that name through things, but when I watched it, I was like, no, doesn't ring bells. But,
Chris Candido, I know, but I don't remember that guy at all. Alex Shelley, of course, we know, Motor City Machine Guns now. The Naturals were a phenomenal tag team. I'm not sure where they went wrong, but Chase Stevens, Andy Douglas, really good. I think Chase Stevens is still involved in wrestling at some point. I don't know what happened with Andy Douglas, though. And, of course, America's Most Wanted is probably the greatest tag team that TNA ever produced.
Yeah, I would agree from what I know about it, at least, too, and what they came out of. And then you've got your world heavyweight match, Raven's Rules, as we say, Raven and Rhino, kind of an ECW throwback type match. It's fine. I'm not really going to review that here, but it's fine. It goes on long enough. It's you get enough, and you get Raven, gets his pin, and that's it. It's about 15 minutes. But then we get to the big one, man. And they give this match a good 23 minutes. You know, everybody gets their fun entrance. Of course, it's not a big place, so they're not wasting a lot of time getting to the ring, getting stuff going. And you know, I gotta say, the action in this, man, it's pretty nonstop. Like I hate to be, you know, cliche about it, but it delivers on that part of the moniker.
Absolutely. These guys worked their butts off in this match, and it was so much fun. And you got such contrasting styles of wrestling in this, right? Samoa Joe is that brute, like, strength guy, and he just gonna knock the crap out of you. AJ Styles is that high flying guy, and Christopher Daniels is that finesse guy, right? He's that worker's worker guy. He goes in there, he can do all the high moves. That, you know, best moonsault ever is one of his finishers, and just the three styles played so well together.
I'll tell you, my Christopher Daniels, like, just walking away from this again, having not really seen him in anything before, I was like, a more agile Arn Anderson. He's kind of that throwback kind of wrestler. Like, he's going to ground you. He can put on holds. He's got good moves, but he can get up on the ropes. He can do that stuff too. Joe, again, the bruiser, like you say, but he can do the kicks and he can fly a little bit himself. And I've always thought the Muscle Buster was a nasty looking move.
Oh, God.
It looks like that would really hurt no matter how you did it. And then AJ Styles is doing all of his stuff. Like, if anything you've seen AJ Styles do in the later part, it's all here. Like, but it's a lot faster because he's a lot younger. You know, all the tendons are still attached and stuff. The bones aren't shattered. But no, they go at each other really hard. And I want to impress upon people, like, the cardio part of that is not lost on me. Like, a 20-minute wrestling match for a heavyweight wrestling match or a main event, there's always rest stops. You know, you can feel them, and they're good. That tells a good story to do that. You can't just flippy-floppy the whole time, right? These guys, though, build those in as part of the constant move because there's always a threat. Whenever two of them gang up on one, as soon as they get the one guy down, they go right at each other. Like, alliances last for about 5 seconds. And I was really, really impressed with that. And what I love in it is, you can tell it too if you're watching it, Christopher Daniels is calling a hell of a match between these two guys. Like, he is clearly directing the traffic. And he's been in that position a long time. Like you said, he held that title for a good while. He was really the king of that mountain, and he's going to bring these, you know, two guys that have been tearing it up along with him, and they all did a good job in the ballet of all of it and the mix together of it.
What I like too, you talk about the rest holds in a heavyweight match. Their rest holds are hit him with a big move, have him slide out of the way, and let the other two go. You don't realize that they're in these rest holds, right? It doesn't even phase you that Christopher Daniels is sitting outside of the ring because Joe and AJ are going at each other so bad, and then it doesn't phase you when AJ gets knocked out and over in the corner, and the other two are going at each other. There's so much action that you don't even realize that the other people are kind of taking their little break, so to say, right at the time, because it's so fluid and so good. And the high flying, AJ doing the flip over the top rope on top of those guys, phenomenal. I loved the take on the triple suplex, right? Instead of a suplex, Joe comes over there, grabs them both, and just slams them down. It was just absolutely fantastically done. Just so much fun watching these guys work with each other, and you're surprised watching these matches that these guys aren't as beat up as they could be. Right. They're all three are still going to this day. Now, Daniels supposedly had his retirement match recently, but all three of them up until this day still going at it. And, you know, the only one who really gets hurt a lot is probably Joe, and even he isn't hurt a ton. But he, you know, he's the one who's had the worst of it, I think. But
yeah, the wear and tear on his body just because of the size and what he's doing, like, it's just going to put more tear on your joints, even for all of what AJ does. What I liked about it too, and I'll give credit to the way you're talking about, the way that you don't feel like the match ever lags, is a lot of that is on Mike Tenay and Don West. They are doing a hell of a job, along with the camera group, who is not a big group of people. They're really getting you around in that action. And again, you know, think about the fact that this is just a couple of sound stages stuck together. You know, it's a small space. It's a hot crowd. Everybody's, you know, really hyped for it. I really loved the spot where Styles leans on Joe's shoulders. It falls back, and the way Joe flips himself forward in that, it's, you know, it's a little bit of a modified, you know, Frankensteiner situation. I was really impressed that he could move like that. That was really, really good. That's one of the better spots in the match.
Joe is, I don't know how to say it, a phenomenon, right? The guy looks like he could only ground and pound you, but he can fly, he can move. he's amazing. He goes over top ropes, through the ropes. He does all those things that these cruiserweight people would do. And you're like, how does a guy that looks like him do this kind of stuff?
It's
And
like watching Derrick Henry run the football in open space. Like
Oh,
when
yeah.
he breaks loose, something that big, moving that fast. You just don't see it. It's rare.
Joe, yeah, he quickly became one of my favorite favorite wrestlers after he debuted. I had not seen a whole lot of his Ring of Honor stuff. Every Ring of Honor show that I saw, he was never part of or on. So I wasn't familiar with his work. I'd heard about him at the time, but when he came into TNA and you actually got to see what that guy did, it was like, holy crap. Like, wow. And even to this day, Joe is an absolutely one of the best workers in the business right now, even still, and love it.
It's fun too, like I said, to watch the younger AJ Styles and some of the flair that he put in his jump moves off the ropes and things. Now it's that there's a little more control. The forearm is what it is, and some of the other stuff. But he's doing twists and turns, and the guy was just a flying phenomenon. And it's like watching the best of like RVD and stuff in those days. You remember when he just could do things that you just didn't see anybody do. The fastest feet in the business or whatever. And clearly he's doing that. He's got a lot of I'm watching him and I'm seeing a lot of Ricky Steamboat and a lot of guys that are part of his style, if you will, and going back and forth. But I'm gonna tell you that Muscle Buster's nasty looking. Like I said, that's a nasty move, and he takes it hard. I'm like, well, that ring did not look like it was being six-sided. It didn't. Maybe the ropes were tighter. It didn't make the mat any less hard. Like felt like straight plywood underneath that sucker when it was bouncing, man. So
yeah, that Muscle Buster move is always one that I watch that is just so cringy because it looks like it's gonna tear someone's neck off, right? Like he tucks the neck in and then lands them hard on there, mostly toward the rear. But man, that move is so dangerous, and I'm surprised that he's still using it to this day. I mean, it ended Tyson Kidd's career. He broke his neck on that move, and I'm surprised more people didn't get hurt taking that move, because I think he's the only one that I can think of that it really caused major damage to.
Yeah, and probably just one of those freak things too.
Absolutely.
That happens. It's more times you do stuff. Every time I see a package pile driver, I feel the same way. I'm like, wait, that does not look like a protected move at all. But
anytime I see any pile driver, I just don't. I don't, unless they're actually literally falling backwards onto their back. I don't see how you don't get hurt doing that kind of stuff.
I think it's because the way when I grew up and watching Arn Anderson do it so much and watching Terry Funk do it, the way they did it protected the guy a little bit. You could tell.
Like but even still.
But it looks good. It looks vicious, and that's the thing. And what's great about this is you do get the ultimate heel moment where Daniels is like, "Screw it," and he brings the belt in because he's about to knock somebody's teeth out with that. And I love it the way that they twist that around. Right, he's trying to hit Joe with it. Joe gets him in a great snap power slam. Talk about a great move. That is eat your heart out, Ron Simmons. That is a hell of a power slam. And I thought that was it. And but Daniels was able to kick the belt into the side of his head after it was over with, which was great. That's a great move. I love that whole sequence right before we get to the end.
It's a phenomenal sequence. Just the end is great too. You'd think that someone's going to use their finisher and take the win, but Christopher Daniels goes for his angel wings.
Great move, by the way. Love that move.
Fantastic move. And AJ rolls it up and pins him. And
he does a famous Ric Flair ending. When Flair liked to beat people, but he wanted to put him over, or when he was going to put somebody over, he loved getting in a reverse and doing a backslide. He loved that move. He just thought it could look good because he get his legs up in the air and all that stuff. And when I saw that, immediately I thought, it's the Ric Flair ending. And the way Daniels, like, the shock on his face sells the hell out of that. Yeah. And it's great because you feel like he's about to plant AJ into the dirt. And then AJ just right around with that momentum, does that great backslide into that move. It was awesome. I really, really went over for that. And the crowd popped for it hard, too. And I was like, okay, that was really well done. It was a great sequence at the end because Joe's laid out to the side. He's pissed because he just missed it. And then Daniels is shocked that, oh, my gosh, this guy reversed my move and he pinned me that way.
Ends his longest reign ever for TNA as an X Division champion, and AJ Styles is now firmly planted back in the X division, where he'll be for a little while before going back to the heavyweight division again. He's going to pop in and out of that division over and over again. And I like it. I thought it was cool that they would allow him to do that. It put more importance on it, the fact that you have a former NWA champion going for this X Division title, right? It made that title feel more important, and I thought that this match did that as well, especially as they're coming out of their dark period and going into the Spike TV era. I think that was a good move to do. They want their superstars to be showcased.
I agree, and usually this is the part where we start doing our fantasy rebook. And Brian, I don't have one, man. I don't think you could book it any better. This is awesome. This match is hot. It's the longest one on the card, as it should be, and it ends with a great pop. I mean, there's nothing dull about it at all.
Yeah, I don't think that you could change anything in this match. It was perfectly paced, full of just great moves, full of energy. Kept you on your toes. Your eyes were locked into this match the whole time. There wasn't any time where you're like, look down somewhere, right? Now we tend to look at our phones all the time. There's no point in this match where you're going to sit and not watch, because it was that action-packed and entertaining. And, having AJ Styles win, my son was watching with me, right? My youngest, and he asked me, who wins this match, right? And I said, I actually don't remember. And he goes, who do you want to win this match, since you don't remember? So I said, well, I want AJ Styles to win this match. And he goes, cool. And so I was like, and AJ Styles won the match.
There you go, yeah.
It's been a long time since I watched, so it was really cool. It was kind of fun.
And look, it was the kickoff to a lot of things. I mean, this was going to be the focus of the X division for a while for TNA. They were going to, do a lot with these three guys. They were each going to have storylines together, separate from each other. The feud would go on. You'd have an Iron Man match. You'd have Joe do a hell of an attack on Christopher Daniels. He muscle busters him on a steel chair, which was a way to let Daniels get off the TV for a little while, but and heal up. But what a bump to have to do it on. But you got a revenge storyline on that. You got a lot more three-way matches between these guys, other guys. Daniels would ultimately win this thing back at Destination X, one of their pay-per-views, so he would get it back. Years later, though, at 2009, at Turning Point, the TNA World Championship would go down, and AJ Styles would beat Christopher Daniels for that world title. Not his first reign, as we know, but another one to come around. So clearly TNA took the heat off of this and and used each guy. They figured out ways to let me get everybody involved and keep them going and keep the interest. And that's a hard thing to do when you're coming off a hot match like this, is how do you keep everybody engaged without just doing another retread and another rematch. And they found unique ways to do it. It's one of the things the triple threat gives you, is you have multiple branching storylines you can go with now, and they clearly did a good job with it going forward.
Yeah, I remember in 2009 when they had that AJ Styles as the champion taking on Daniels for his world title. At that time, it changed from NWA title to TNA world title with the dispute with the NWA. But I remember when that happened, I was like, holy crap, this is awesome, because Styles had been wrestling other wrestlers who were bigger names in the main event scene. To have them put the faith in he and Daniels to deliver a world's title match was super cool. And I remember watching that and just being thrilled.
And I mean, going forward, both these guys joined WWE in the 2010s. Joe joined in 2015. He was a big part of things. He moved up from NXT to the main roster, and he and AJ Styles had a hell of a match at a SummerSlam that ended in a disqualification. Kind of made me mad at the time, but it was a good SummerSlam match in 2018. They were in a Hell in a Cell match. They've had moments to go at each other again through the years, but even seeing those, and as good as those are, and they're fun, whatever, this was a hype match for both of them in terms of like seeing each other on a high point for a career. And it certainly was one of the bigger things that TNA did for a number of years. They kept trying to recapture this, because while again there's no pay-per-view buy rates and the crowd wasn't huge, rating wise and as far as like people talking about it, this one gets brought up a lot. If you go look at a list of like best TNA main events, this one's right up there with some of the bigger ones.
Yeah, and what's interesting is you look at the critical reviews of the pay-per-view. I think the score was like an 8 out of 10 for the pay-per-view. They scored very well on the pay-per-views during their dark period. Very, very well. And so it's really a shame. I'm sure there's no buy rate because it was during a period when nobody was able to watch the show. I remember trying to watch it online, and it was just not the same. And so I fell behind on some of that stuff because of it until they were finally back on Spike TV. So just this was, I would say, the coming out party for all three of these guys. Now they had success obviously before, but now we're going to see it on a larger scale, especially with the Spike TV deal.
Yeah, absolutely, and those will be tales for another day on Main Event Maniacs here, Brian. But as we wrap it up here, been fun talking about this one, and it's been fun talking about a little TNA here as we branched out in 2025, and more fun things to come in the future, I would say.
Absolutely, we got some AEW we got to talk about.
Yep.
Maybe we'll throw in a Ring of Honor main event here or there too.
It'd be a fun thing to do. Yeah.
Those are a little more difficult at times to find, but they had some really good stuff back in the day, and even to this day. So we'll branch out to some other feds and maybe some ECW, as we mentioned before as well.
Whenever those shows occur, you'll find them here on this very feed, The Juice Box. Thanks so much to Juice for giving us this platform, letting us talk about some of the best, most infamous, maybe forgotten main events of time here. You can always find that anywhere on where you find the podcast. Of course, you can follow Juice on Twitter and X at Juicy Steen, Instagram Juicy Wrestling Closet. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well at Juicy Steen, and wherever you find the podcast, again, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and the YouTube channel's got live video and stuff now. Juicy's got a lot of cool stuff going on with a lot of different folks, and we're happy just to be part of the Juice Box team here.
Absolutely, and if you want to follow JRI, you can do so on X. Jay is at JRan here, and I'm at Brian Thomas 878. We look forward to hearing from you. If there's a main event you want to hear us cover, please send us a DM, hit us up on X, and we'll definitely put it on the list.
Absolutely. So until next time, for Brian, I'm Jay. This has been your main event.
That was The Juice Box with Juice Springsteen. Make sure to subscribe to The Juice Box wherever you listen to podcasts.